So our special MyHR Live today is about the coronavirus and the COVID-19 disease that it causes. Thank you all for joining us. We were due to go ahead at 2 p.m. today and we postponed to catch a government announcement to make sure that we were fully informed as we came into this conversation. So thanks for your patience today. Before we kick off, as usual, some housekeeping. This is a live video. Please ask questions as we go through and at the end I'll gather all the questions and do an FAQ session. If you do ask a question, please be careful that it's anonymous because it will be captured in the recording, and the recording, as usual, will be available on all our channels after the session as well. So YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, you'll be able to find it there in case you missed it. We are talking about the coronavirus today. It's been a situation that has developed really rapidly over the last couple of weeks, particularly in New Zealand. So the content we're going to cover off is a brief bit about the disease and the virus itself. This is information most of us probably could recite in our sleep at this point, but we'll go through that content. We'll then talk about the government announcements and what they mean for businesses and communities around the country. We'll talk about what the government is putting forward as support for businesses in terms of the wage subsidies, the support for people who do get sick and who need to self-isolate, and then a quick word about the benefits. What we will wrap up with is some conversations around the steps businesses can be taking to mitigate the impact on them and their teams. And then, as I said at the end, we'll answer a bunch of questions and just have a conversation about it because it's really scary times at the moment. I would recommend that if you are feeling anxious or worried, or there are members of your business or your family or your communities who are feeling worried, 1737 is the Ministry of Health free helpline to talk to. It's separate to the coronavirus line. 1737 is for all kinds of help if you're feeling a bit blue or feeling anxious about what's involved. So if you or anyone around you does need some support, 1737 is the number to call. So we'll start off with a brief chat about the disease itself. So the coronavirus is a novel type of coronavirus that came out of China in December of 2019. Obviously it spread rapidly around the world and it causes COVID-19, which is the respiratory and breathing disease that is causing so much trouble. As of 10 minutes ago when I last checked, there were 28 cases in New Zealand. That's up from 20 yesterday. As far as we're aware, all of the cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand are related to people coming into the country and travelling internationally. There hasn't yet been an example of community transmission where someone has gotten sick from someone else who hasn't been travelling, which is good news. We're a part of a global community taking pretty significant and wide-ranging steps to try and contain the disease. The latest announcement from the government is that gatherings of 100 people or more indoors are banned going forward. So on, I think it was Tuesday, it was 500 plus gatherings are banned. Now that cap has been lowered to 100 people indoors or more will no longer be allowed. So that on top of the travel restrictions, where if you land in New Zealand you must self-isolate for 14 days, on top of the general concerns around social distancing and making sure that we're keeping ourselves and our families safe, is obviously having an enormous impact, particularly on the tourism, travel, entertainment, events, hospitality industries, and that will have pretty large ripple effects throughout the rest of the business community as well. So in response to these pressures and challenging times, the government put out an economic stimulus package on Tuesday, which had 3 key components to support businesses, individuals who are working, and then those on the benefit as well. So what we'll do is go through each of those 3 areas quite quickly in case you aren't aware of the content, and that will inform the latter part of our discussion around what businesses can actually do to be addressing this and managing this with their teams. So the wage subsidy piece is the one that's been most talked about. What this allows for is a one-off lump sum payment from the government to support businesses to keep their employees employed during this time. So the subsidies which are available are $585.80 a week for a full-time employee. Full-time is classed as 20 hours a week or more, and $350 a week for a part-time employee, which is less than 20 hours. So this payment will be made to employers based on how many employees they have in a lump sum to cover 12 weeks. So you receive a payment of cash from the government based on what you've asked for in terms of the number of employees that you're supporting. So employers will receive a maximum payment of $7,029.60 for a full-time employee and $4,200 for a part-time employee. Our understanding of how these payments are going to be made is that they are not prorated. So if you have an employee who's part-time, who maybe works 5 hours a week, you will still get the $350 subsidy, even though that employee might earn less than that. And it's up to you to distribute and pay the wages and salaries of your employees with that lump sum that you receive. So the criteria to access these subsidies, there's always criteria to meet, is that you must have suffered or be projected to experience at least a 30% decline in revenue compared to the same time last year. So a 30% drop in revenue between now and the same time last year. You can also make applications based on a forecast loss. For example, if you're a hotel or a motel and you've had bookings be cancelled out months in ahead because no one's travelling, you can make a claim based on those forecast losses that are yet to hit your business. In your application process, you're asked to make some commitments back to the Ministry for Social Development, who's managing these payments. So the two key ones are that you need to have taken active steps already to mitigate the impact that COVID-19 is having on your business. That could be to reduce discretionary spending, it could be engaging with a bank or financial advisor, it could be having your employees work from home if that's possible. So you need to be engaged in managing the risk to your business as well as claiming for these subsidies. The second piece is that you are required to commit to your best endeavours to keep employing those employees for the next 12 weeks at least 80% of their income for that 12-week period. So I'll read that out again because it's important to be aware of. You'll need to commit to, as much as you can, keeping your employees employed for the 12-week subsidy period at least 80% of their income for that period of time. So the equivalent would be if someone's working 5 days a week, that you have them work no less than 4 days a week. If someone works 20 hours a week, that's no less than 16 hours a week because that's 80%. So you're making a commitment that you will try to keep these people employed. The reason for this is that the subsidy support is obviously intended to help employers keep employees in work because we want to minimise the impact of a future recession as much as possible and make sure that consumers still have money to spend in the local economy at least. So reimburse or subsidies for full-time and part-time employees, they're paid in a lump sum for a 12-week period, and you make some commitments around having tried to mitigate the impact yourself as well as keeping these people employed. It's pretty straightforward to apply. We've had a number of clients do it to date, which has been really awesome, and it's on the Ministry of Social Development site, and I'll put the link up to where you can apply after the video is wrapped up so you can access that easily too. So that's the wage subsidy scheme. The next piece is targeted support at individuals who are having to take leave either because they're sick with COVID-19, they are in self-isolation as a result of potential exposure to someone with COVID-19, or who is caring for someone who is sick or who is themselves in self-isolation. So again, this support is provided through employers to be paid to employees, and it's the same payments, $585.80 per week for someone working full-time and $355 per week for someone working part-time. So this support is a maximum of 8 weeks in total for someone. It's for the length of your recovery or for 8 weeks, whichever one comes first. So if I was to get sick with COVID-19, what would first need to happen is I would need to exhaust my own personal sick leave entitlements. If I've been with a business 2 or 3 years, I might have 5 or 6 or 7 days of sick leave to use. If I'm new to a business, I may not have any sick leave and I might go straight onto this, the support provided by the government. So once that's happened, the government will reimburse me, my employer, to then pay me either the $585 if I'm a full-time worker or the $350 if I'm a part-time worker, and that then gets paid to me for as long as I'm sick or recovering, or for a maximum of 8 weeks. So hopefully we don't see too much of this if we can flatten the curve, as the epidemiologists are saying, and keep the number of infections quite low. Hopefully we don't have too many people claiming for this support, but it is there. If you have employees in your business or in your team who get sick, who have to self-isolate, or who are required to care for someone who is sick or in self-isolation, there is financial support available to make sure that you're not carrying the cost of them being sick or them self-isolating. What we may do after this video is put up the fact sheets the governments have put out. They are accessible publicly, but it took us a bit of hunting to find them. So if you have questions about the numbers or about the process, we'll put up this information later on so that you can find it if you need to know about it. The final piece to talk about is around the benefits support that the government's issuing. We won't go into this in too much detail because this applies to people who aren't currently in work, but it's a doubling of the winter energy payment and an additional $25 a week for benefit payments, along with a couple of other changes designed to make life a bit easier for those who aren't working. So just to quickly recap, the wage subsidy program is to support businesses keep employees employed. There are payments available to full-time and part-time workers, which are paid in lump sums. There is support for employees, again through their employer, if they need to take leave because they're sick or to care for someone, or if they have to self-isolate. And the third part of the benefits of the economic package is to support those who are not in work and who are on benefits who might be experiencing some challenges. So that's the support the government's put together. We then move on to talking to what I suspect is going to be the meat of our discussion today, which is what can we as business owners do to mitigate the impact on our teams and on our business. So what I wanted to do was really quickly run through some options that you can take as a business owner or as a manager. We'll then talk about extreme scenarios if those measures hadn't made much of an impact, and then we'll open it up to questions because I'm sure everyone would like to know what they can and can't be doing in this time, which is pretty unprecedented. So as a business, what you can do with consultation with your team, you have a lot of options in front of you, which is really good news. So one of the things that you could propose to your team is reducing hours, either temporarily for a fixed period of time or for the indefinite future, kind of as all of this plays out, because we don't know what some of the impacts are going to be yet. So we could talk about reductions in pay, so people taking a pay cut, again for a short period of time. If you wanted to have 2 weeks at a time and review it every 2 weeks as the situation changes, that would be pretty fair. Or a pay cut indefinitely as we try to ride out the situation. So reducing hours and reducing pay would need to happen in consultation with your team. This can happen pretty quickly. The situation has developed extraordinarily rapidly and businesses are already feeling the pinch. So as and when you need to consider making these changes, consult quickly, move quickly, because the sooner we get this under control, the sooner we can hopefully go back to business as usual and ride out sort of the economic recession that people are expecting to come. Other things you can try are an annual close down. So if you haven't yet had an annual close down, you're allowed one a year. With 14 days written notice, you can impose an annual close down on your business, either in whole or in segments if you have different teams whose work is varyingly affected by the impacts of the coronavirus. So an annual close down means your employees are required to use their annual leave. You can have one a year. It can be of any length. So if you wanted to have a 2-week or a 4-week or a 12-week close down, that's fine. You just need to give your team 14 days notice and not have had one in the previous 12 months because you're allowed one a year. That doesn't address immediate cash flow issues because you will still have to pay your employees' annual leave out to them. But if it's for a longer period of time, you're keeping them employed, they get access to their annual leave, and it means that you can potentially mitigate some of the effects of this while not having to lay anyone off. So that's an option. The other thing too is unpaid leave. So one of our clients who is a larger retail business has offered sessions of the option to take sections of unpaid leave to their team, and some of them have taken that up, which means that they have fewer people in the business, which minimises that social exposure piece. They have fewer people they need to pay, which helps with their cash flow. Again, they're not having to lay anyone off, which is great, and it's at the employee's discretion because they are the ones opting to take the unpaid leave. So that's an option available to you as well. What has changed a lot in the last 48 hours? So on Monday and Tuesday, myself and the team were run off our feet with inquiries from clients who were worried about the impact this was having. And after the government's announcement on Tuesday, we have seen a number of businesses recognise that with the help of the subsidies, they should be able to keep the doors open for at least the 12 weeks of the length of those subsidies. So really have a close look at what you would need to get from the government in order to be sustainable and what you would have to top up if necessary to the 80% threshold. And if you have any questions, please do get in touch. The Ministry for Social Development, again, are the ones managing the distribution of this fund, so they're a great place to go if you have questions too. But $585.80 a week for full-time employees and $350 a week for part-time employees is pretty significant in terms of support, and we're really optimistic a lot of our clients won't have to lay people off to be sustainable in the short term at least. So if your business has completely fallen off a cliff, reducing hours isn't going to help, cutting pay isn't going to be enough. There's no point of an annual close down because you've just run out of money. If your business has been so severely affected by this that it's basically closing the doors, switching the lights off and walking out, if in your employment agreements you have a force majeure clause, you may be able to use this to close the business, to end the employment of your employees and not have to consult, give notice or potentially meet some of those other obligations you would otherwise have to if you were running a typical restructure process. So force majeure is not a silver bullet. I can see some of your eyes lighting up through the camera. You need to have the clause in your employment agreement, and the impact on your business needs to have been pretty close to catastrophic in terms of there being nothing you can do, no options to move forward, and you're basically shutting the business down. If you have questions about force majeure, or if you want to see if your business would meet the criteria, again, get in touch. We're happy to have that conversation. For most businesses, they are in the survive kind of path. They think they'll be able to make it through. They just have to tighten their belts and tighten their spending for a period of time. Those businesses won't be able to use the force majeure clause. Whereas if you were a tour operator whose business was entirely based on inbound tourism and there was nothing coming in, you had no cash reserves, and you basically had to wind up your operation, in that situation, force majeure might be available to you if it's in the employment agreements of your employees. So it's not a silver bullet, but it's definitely something to consider and be aware of, and again, get in touch if you have any questions. So that's me being really quick and keeping us to time in terms of giving you, the audience, a lot of time to ask questions if needed. So just to recap really quickly, business steps: reducing hours, reducing pay, potentially an annual close down if one's available to you, inviting your team to take periods of unpaid leave. And if there are other suggestions that come from your team related to ways to mitigate the financial impact, consider them, put a plan together. The important thing is to move quickly and transparently so that you're, kind of reacting quickly but fairly as needed to these pressures and challenges. So that's everything that I had prepared to talk about. Have we got questions coming through? That's a really, really great question. So if you are someone who can work from home, your business should support you to work from home, and you would be eligible to receive those subsidies if necessary. Voluntary self-isolation is an unusual one because if you don't meet the current Ministry of Health guidelines for self-isolation, so you haven't travelled internationally, you haven't just landed back in the country, you haven't been in contact with someone, and you're not at high risk of having caught it, if you are choosing to self-isolate, you and your business need to work, or you and your employer need to work together to find a way to manage that. If you can work from home, that would be the obvious solution for 2 weeks or a week or however long you're choosing to isolate for. If you can't work from home, then if your business can demonstrate that they've had that 30% impact on revenue in the last 12 months, they would be eligible to get those subsidies to pay you during this time. But if that isn't the case, if your business is healthy and you as an individual are just uncomfortable about attending work during that time, it's up to you and your business to figure out a way to make that work. So, yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. We'll be keeping an eye on the comments for this video so that we can answer questions that do come through if anything comes to mind. The video again will be available on our Facebook, our YouTube and our LinkedIn pages so you can access it afterwards. Again, stay safe. It's a really stressful time out there for a lot of businesses, and if you personally aren't directly impacted, that's fantastic. But reach out to friends and family who might be. If anyone's feeling uncomfortable or anxious about these times, give that Ministry of Health line number a call on 1737, and otherwise, yeah, just look out for each other and be kind. Really, it's going to be a really interesting few months, and it could get a lot worse before it gets a lot better. So on that cheerful note, thank you so much again for joining us. I look forward to seeing you at the next one, and stay safe. We'll talk again soon.